afternoon, and welcome to another edition of the Legacy of Queens. Today for Sunday, November 22nd, 2020. Today's episode is episode number 5, and we have a great legacy. This guy's been around for quite some time, and he's still alive, doing his thing. Well, what else can you say about this guy? Anthony Dominic Benedetto. He's an American singer of traditional pop standards, big band, show tunes, and jazz. He is also a painter, having created works under his birth name that are on permanent public display in several institutions. And he is the founder of the Frank Sinatra School of the Arts in Astoria, Queens. Born and raised in Astoria to an Italian-American family, he began singing at an early age. He fought in the final stages of World War II as a U.S. Army infantryman in the European theater. And afterward, he developed his singing technique, signed with Columbia Records, and had his first number one popular song with Because of You in 1951. Who am I talking about? Today on the Legacy of Queens, we look at 94-year-old Tony Bennett and how he is still going strong after all these years. Today on the Legacy of Queens. And welcome once again. I'm Jason DeCanio, the host of The Legacy of Queens. It's episode 5 on this Sunday, November 22nd, 2020, 4 days before Thanksgiving. Tony Bennett, been around a long time, doing his thing. Popular standards and big band things. We're going to look at him today on his legacy. Anthony Dominic Benedetto was born on August 3rd, 1926 at St. John's Hospital in Long Island City, Queens. He is the son of grocer John Benedetto and seamstress Anna Cerasi, and was the first member of his family to be born in a hospital. In 1906, John had emigrated from Paragorini, a rural eastern district of the southern Italian city of Reggio Calabria. Anna had been born in the U.S. shortly after her parents also emigrated from the Calabria region in 1899. Other relatives came over as well as part of the mass migration of Italians to America. Tony grew up with an older sister, Mary, and an older brother, John Jr. With a father who was ailing and unable to work, the children grew up in poverty. John Sr. instilled in his son a love of art and literature and a compassion for human suffering, but died when Tony was only 10 years old. The experience of growing up in the Great Depression and a distaste for the effects of the Hoover administration would make the child a lifelong Democrat. Bennett grew up listening to Al Jolson, Eddie Cantor, Judy Garland, and Bing Crosby, as well as jazz artists such as Louis Armstrong, Jack Teagarden, and Joe Venuti. His Uncle Dick was a tap dancer in vaudeville, giving him an early window into show business. And his Uncle Frank was the Queens Borough Library Commissioner. By age 10, he was already singing and performed at the opening of the Triborough Bridge, standing next to Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, who patted him on the head. Drawing was another early passion of his, and he became known as the class caricaturist at PS 141 and anticipated a career in commercial art. And he began singing for money at age 13, performing as a singing waiter in several Italian restaurants around his native Queens. He attended New York's School of Industrial Art, where he studied painting and music, and would later appreciate their emphasis on proper technique. But he dropped out at age 16 to help support his family. and he worked as a copy boy and a runner for the Associated Press in Manhattan, and in several other low-skilled, low-paying jobs. However, he mostly set his sights on a professional singing career, returning to performing as a singing waiter, playing and winning amateur nights all around the city, and having a successful engagement at a Paramus, New Jersey nightclub. Benedetto was drafted into the United States Army in 1944 of November during the final stages of World War II. He did basic training at Fort Dix and Fort Robinson as part of becoming an infantry rifleman. Benedetto ran afoul of a sergeant from the South who disliked the Italian from New York City. Heavy doses of KP duty or bar cleaning resulted. Processed through the huge Le Havre replacement depot in January of 1945, he was assigned as a replacement infantryman to the 255th Infantry Regime of the 63rd Infantry Division, a unit filling in for the heavy losses suffered in the Battle of the Bulge. He moved across France and later into Germany. As March 1945 began, he joined the front line and what he would later describe as a front row seat in hell. As the German army was pushed back to its homeland, Benedetto and his company saw bitter fighting in cold winter conditions, often hunkering down in foxholes as German 88mm guns fired on them. At the end of March, they crossed the Rhine and entered Germany, engaging in dangerous house-to-house, town-after-town fighting to clean out German soldiers. And during the first week of April, they crossed the Kocher River, and by the end of the month, reached the Danube. During his time in combat, Benedetto narrowly escaped death several times. The experience made him a pacifist. He would later write, "Anybody who thinks that war is romantic obviously hasn't gone through one," and later say, "It was a nightmare that's permanent. I just said, this is not life. This is not life." At the war's conclusion, he was involved in the liberation of a Nazi concentration camp near Landsberg, where some American prisoners of war from the 63rd Division had also been held. Benedetto stayed in Germany as part of the occupying force, but was assigned to an informal special services band unit that would entertain nearby American forces. His dining with a black friend from high school at a time when the Army was still racially segregated led to his being demoted and reassigned to Graves Registration Service duties. Subsequently, he sang with the 314th Army Special Services Band under the stage name Joe Barry, a name he had started using before the war, chosen after the city and province in Italy and as a partial anagram of his family origins in Calabria. He played with many musicians who would have post-war careers. Upon his discharge from the Army and return to the United States in 1946, Benedetto studied at the American Theater Wing on the GI Bill. He was taught the bel canto singing discipline, which would keep his voice in good shape for his entire career. He continued to perform wherever he could, including while waiting tables. Based upon a suggestion from a teacher at American Theater Wing, he developed an unusual approach that involved imitating, as he sang, the style and phrasing of other musicians, such as that of Stan Getz's saxophone and Art Tatum's piano, helping him to improvise as he interpreted a song. And he made a few recordings as Barry in 1949 for Small Leslie Records, but they failed to sell. In 1949, Pearl Bailey recognized Benedetto's talent and asked him to open for her in Greenwich Village. She had invited Bob Hope to the show, and Hope decided to take Benedetto on the road with him and simplified his name to Tony Bennett. In 1950, Bennett cut a demo of Boulevard of Broken Dreams and was signed to the major Columbia Records label by Mitch Miller. Warned by Miller not to imitate Frank Sinatra, who was just then leaving Columbia, Bennett began his career as a crooner of commercial pop tunes. His first big hit was Because of You, a ballad produced by Miller with a lush orchestral arrangement from Percy Faith. It started out gaining popularity on jukeboxes, then reached number one on the pop charts in 1951 and stayed there for 10 weeks, selling over 1 million copies. This was followed to the top of the charts later that year by a similarly styled rendition of Hank Williams' Cold, Cold Heart, which helped introduce Williams and country music in general to a wider, more national audience. The Miller and Faith tandem continued to work on all of Bennett's early hits. Bennett's recording of Blue Velvet was also very popular and attracted screaming teenage fans at concerts at the famed Paramount Theater in New York. Bennett did 7 shows a day, starting at 10:30 a.m. and elsewhere. February 12, 1952, Bennett married Ohio art student and jazz fan Patricia Beach, whom he had met the previous year after a nightclub performance in Cleveland. 2,000 female fans dressed in black gathered outside the ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan, New York, in mock mourning. The couple had 2 sons, DeAndre, Danny, born 1954, and Diego, Day, born 1955. A third number one came in 1953 with Rags to Riches. Unlike Bennett's other early hits, this was an up-tempo big band number with a bold, brassy sound and a double tango in the instrumental break. It topped the charts for 8 weeks. Later that year, the producers of the upcoming Broadway musical Kismet had Bennett record Stranger in Paradise as a way of promoting the show during a New York newspaper strike. The song reached the top, the show was a hit, and Bennett began a long practice of recording show tunes. Stranger in Paradise was also a number one hit in the United Kingdom a year and a half later and started Bennett's career as an international artist. Once the rock and roll era began in 1955, the dynamic of the music industry changed, and it became harder and harder for existing pop singers to do well commercially. Nevertheless, Bennett continued to enjoy success, placing 8 songs in the Billboard Top 40 during the latter part of the 1950s with In the Middle of an Island, which he vehemently hated so much, reaching the highest at number 9 in 1957. For a month in August through September of 1956, Bennett hosted an NBC Saturday night television variety show, The Tony Bennett Show, as a summer replacement for The Perry Como Show. Patti Page and Julius LaRosa had in turn hosted the 2 previous months, and they all shared the same singers, dancers, and orchestra. In 1959, Bennett would again fill in for The Perry Como Show, this time alongside Teresa Brewer and J.P. Morgan as co-hosts of the summer-long Perry Presents. 1954, the guitarist Chuck Wayne became Bennett's musical director. Bennett released his first long-playing album in 1955 called Cloud 7. The album was billed as featuring Wayne and showed Bennett's leanings toward jazz. 1957, Ralph Shannon became Bennett's pianist, arranger, and musical director, replacing Wayne. And Sharon told Bennett that a career singing sweet saccharine songs like Blue Velvet wouldn't last long, and encouraged Bennett to focus even more on his jazz inclinations. The result was the 1957 album The Beat of My Heart. It used well-known jazz musicians such as Herbie Mann and Nat Adderley, with a strong emphasis on percussion from the likes of Art Blakey, Joe Jones, Latin star Candido Camaro, and Chico Hamilton. And the album was both popular and critically praised. Bennett followed this work by working with the Count Basie Orchestra, becoming the first male pop vocalist to sing with Basie's band. The albums Basie Swings, Bennett Sings, 1958, and In Person, 1959, were the well-regarded fruits of this collaboration, with Chicago being one of the standout songs. Bennett also built up the quality and therefore the reputation of his nightclub act, and in this he was following the path of Sinatra and other top jazz and standard singers of this era. In June of 1962, Bennett staged a highly promoted concert performance at Carnegie Hall using a stellar lineup of musicians including Al Cohn, Kenny Burrell, and Candido, as well as the Ralph Sharon Trio. and the concert featured 44 songs, including favorites like I've Got the World on a String and The Best Is Yet to Come. It was a big success, further cementing Bennett's reputation as a star both at home and abroad. Bennett also appeared on television, and in October 1962, he sang on the initial broadcast of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Also in 1962, Bennett released his recording of I Left My Heart in San Francisco, a decade-old but little-known song originally written for an opera singer. And although this reached only number 19 on the Billboard Hot 100, it spent close to a year on various other charts and increased Bennett's exposure. The album of the same title was a top 5 hit, and both the single and album achieved gold record status. The song won Grammy Awards for Record of the Year and Best Male Soul Vocal Performance for Bennett. Over the years, this would become known as Bennett's signature song. 2001, it was ranked 23rd on an RIAA/NEA list of the most historically significant songs of the 20th century. Bennett's following album, I Want to Be Around, was also a top 5 success, with the title track and The Good Life each reaching the top 20 of the pop singles chart, along with the top 10 of the adult contemporary chart. The next year brought the Beatles and the British Invasion, and with them still more musical and cultural attention to rock and less to pop, standards, and jazz. Over the next years, Bennett had minor hits with several albums and singles based on show tunes. His last top 40 single was the number 34, If I Ruled the World, from Pickwick in 1965. But his commercial fortunes were clearly starting to decline. An attempt to break into acting with a role in the poorly received 1966 film The Oscar met with middling reviews for Bennett. He did not enjoy the experience and did not seek further roles. A firm believer in the civil rights movement, Bennett participated in the 1965 Selma to Montgomery marches. Years later, he would continue this commitment by refusing to perform in apartheid South Africa. Ralph Shannon and Bennett parted ways in 1965. There was a great pressure on singers such as Lena Horne and Barbra Streisand to record contemporary rock songs, and in this vein, Columbia Records' Clive Davis suggested that Bennett do the same. Bennett was very reluctant, and when he tried, the results pleased no one. This was exemplified by Tony Singh's The Great Hits of Today, 1970, before which Bennett became physically ill at the thought of recording. It featured misguided attempts at Beatles and other current songs, and a ludicrous psychedelic art cover. Years later, Bennett would recall his dismay at being asked to do contemporary material, comparing it to when his mother was forced to produce a cheap dress. By 1972, he had departed Columbia for the Verve division of MGM Records, that's Philips in the UK, and had relocated for a stint in London, where he hosted a television show from the Talk of the Town nightclub in conjunction with Thames Television. Tony Bennett at the Talk of the Town. With his new label, he tried a variety of approaches, including some more Beatles material, but found no renewed commercial success, and in a couple more years, he was without a recording contract. Bennett and his wife, Patricia, had been separated since 1965. Their marriage, a victim of Bennett spending too much time on the road, among other factors. In 1969, Patricia sued him for a divorce on grounds of adultery. In 1971, their divorce became official, and Bennett had become involved with aspiring actress Sandra Grant while filming The Oscar in 1965. And the couple lived together for several years, but in December of 29th of 1971, they quietly married in New York. They had 2 daughters, Joanna and Antonio, born 1970-74, and moved to Los Angeles. Taking matters into his own hands, Bennett started his own record company, Improv. He cut songs that would later become favorites, such as What Is This Thing Called Love? And made 2 well-regarded albums with jazz pianist Bill Evans. The Tony Bennett-Bill Evans album, 1975, and Together Again in 1976. But Improv lacked a distribution arrangement with a major label, and by 1977, it was out of business. As the decade neared its end, Bennett had no recording contract, no manager, and was not performing many concerts outside of Las Vegas. His second marriage was failing, and they separated in '79 with her filing for divorce. But when the marriage officially ended is unclear. Some people say the marriage was dissolved by court order on July 1st of 1983, but there are other reports saying the divorce papers did not become official until 2007. He had developed a drug addiction, was living beyond his means, and had the Internal Revenue Service trying to seize his Los Angeles home. He had hit bottom. After a near-fatal cocaine overdose in 1979, Bennett called his sons, Danny and Dave, for help. "Look, I'm lost here," he told them. "It seems like people don't want to hear the music I make." Danny Bennett, who's an aspiring musician himself, also came to realization. The band Danny and his brother had started, Quacky Duck and his Barnyard Friends, had foundered, and Danny's musical abilities were limited. However, he had discovered during this time that he did have a head for business. His father, on the other hand, had tremendous musical talent, but was having trouble sustaining a career from it and had little financial sense. So Danny signed on as his father's manager. Danny got his father's expenses under control, moved him back to New York, and began booking him in colleges and small theaters to get him away from a Vegas image. After some effort, a successful plan to pay back the IRS debt was put into place. The singer had also reunited with Ralph Sharon as his pianist and musical director, and would remain with him until Sharon's retirement in 2002. By '86, Tony Bennett was re-signed to Columbia Records, this time with creative control, and released The Art of Excellence. This became his first album to reach the charts since 1972. Danny Bennett felt that younger audiences who were unfamiliar with his father would respond to music if given a chance. No changes to Tony's formal appearance, singing style, musical accompaniment, the Ralph Sharon Trio or an orchestra, or a song choice, generally the Great American Songbook, were necessary or desirable. Accordingly, Danny began regularly to book his father on Late Night with David Letterman, a show with a younger hip audience. This was subsequently followed by appearances on Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Simpsons, Muppets Tonight, and various MTV programs. In 1993, Bennett played a series of benefit concerts organized by alternative rock radio stations around the country. And the plan worked. As Tony later remembered, "I realized that young people had never heard these songs. Cole Porter, Gershwin, they were like, 'Who wrote that?' To them, it was different. If you're different, you stand out." And during this time, Bennett continued to record, first putting out the acclaimed Look Back Astoria portrait of the artist in 1990, then emphasizing themed albums such as the Sinatra homage Perfectly Frank and the Fred Astaire tribute Steppin' Out. The latter two both achieved gold status and won Grammys for Best Traditional Pop Vocal Performance, Bennett's first Grammy since 1962, and further established Bennett as the inheritor of the mantle of a classic American great. As Bennett was seen at MTV Video Music Awards shows side by side with the likes of the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Flavor Flav, and his Steppin' Out With My Baby video received MTV airplay, it was clear, as the New York Times said, Tony Bennett has not just bridged the generation gap, he has demolished it. He has solidly connected with a younger crowd, weaned on rock, and there have been no compromises. The new audience reached its height with Bennett's appearance in 1994 on MTV Unplugged. He quipped on the show, "I've been unplugged my whole career," featuring guest appearances by rock and country star Elvis Costello and K.D. Lang, both of whom had an affinity for the standard genre. The show attracted a considerable audience and much media attention. The resulting MTV Unplugged Tony Bennett album went platinum, and besides taking the Best Traditional Pop Vocal Performance Grammy Award for just the third straight year, he also won the top Grammy prize of Album of the Year. Since his comeback, Bennett has financially prospered. And by 1999, his assets were worth 15 to 20 million, and he had no intention of retiring. Saying in reference to masters such as Pablo Picasso, Jack Benny, and Fred Astaire, right up to the day they died, they were performing. If you are creative, you get busier as you get older. And Bennett continued to record and tour steadily, doing 100 shows a year by the end of the 1990s. In concert, Bennett often makes a point of singing one song, usually Fly Me to the Moon, without any microphone or amplification, demonstrating his skills at vocal projection. One show, Tony Bennett's Wonderful World, live from San Francisco, was made into a PBS special, and Bennett also created the idea behind and starred in the first episode of the A&E Network's popular Live by Request series, for which there was an Emmy and a National. Yep. So he did really good. Yep. Really good. Let's see. And he starred in the first episode of the A&E's Network popular Live by Request series, for which he won an Emmy. In addition to numerous television guest performances, Bennett has had cameo appearances as himself in such films as The Scout, Analyze This, and Bruce Almighty. 1998, he made an unlikely but highly successful appearance on the final day of a mud-soaked Glastonbury in an immaculate suit and tie. His whole set on this occasion consisting of songs about the weather. Bennett also published The Good Life, the autobiography of Tony Bennett, in 1998. A series of albums often based on themes such as Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, blues, or duets, has met with largely positive reviews. And Bennett has won 11 more Best Traditional Pop Vocal Performance or Best Traditional Pop Vocal Album Grammys in the subsequent years, most recently for the year 2018. And Bennett has sold over 50 million records worldwide during his career. Accolades came to Bennett. For his contribution to the recording industry, Tony Bennett was given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame at 1560 Vine Street. Bennett was introduced into the Big Band and Jazz Hall of Fame in 1997. He was awarded the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2001 and received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers in 2002. 2002, Q Magazine named Tony Bennett in its list of the 50 bands to see before you die. On December 4, 2005, Bennett was the recipient of a Kennedy Center honor. Later, a theatrical music review of his songs called I Left My Heart, a salute to the music of Tony Bennett, was created and featured some of his best-known songs such as I Left My Heart in San Francisco, Because of You, and Wonderful. The following year, Bennett was inducted into the Long Island Music Hall of Fame. Bennett frequently donates his time to charitable causes, to the extent that he is sometimes nicknamed Tony Benefit. In April of 2002, he joined Michael Jackson, Chris Tucker, and former President Bill Clinton in a fundraiser for the Democratic National Committee at New York's Apollo Theater. He has also recorded public service announcements for Civitan International. In the late 1980s, Bennett entered into a long-term romantic relationship with Susan Crowe, a former New York City school teacher. Susan Marion Crowe, born September 9th, 1966, is 40 years junior to Tony and has grown up in a family of Bennett fans, and it has happened that the singer had once posed with Crowe's mother, Marion, while she was pregnant with her. And as a teenager, Crowe had been the head of the Bay Area fan club for Bennett. Bennett and Crowe founded Exploring the Arts, a charitable organization dedicated to creating, promoting, and supporting arts education. At the same time, they founded and named after Bennett's friend the Frank Sinatra School of the Arts in Queens, a public high school dedicated to teaching the performing arts, which he opened in 2001 and would have a very high graduation rate. 21st of June, 2007, Bennett married Crow in a private civil ceremony in New York that was witnessed by former Governor Mario Cuomo. Danny Bennett continues to be Tony's manager, while Dave Bennett is a recording engineer who has worked on a number of Tony's projects and who opened Bennett Studios in Englewood, New Jersey in 2001. Now shuttered due to the downturn of major label budgets. Combined with skyrocketing overhead, Tony's younger daughter, Antonia, is an aspiring jazz singer who opens the show for her father. Well, in August of 2006, Bennett turned 80 years old. The birthday itself was an occasion for publicity, which then extended through the rest of the following year. Duets, an American classic, reached the highest place ever on the albums chart for an album by Bennett and garnered 2 Grammy Awards. Concerts were given, including a high-profile one for New York radio station WLTW-FM. A performance was done with Christina Aguilera, and a comedy sketch was made with affectionate Bennett impressionist Alec Baldwin on Saturday Night Live. A Thanksgiving time, Rob Marshall directed television special Tony Bennett, an American classic on NBC, which would win multiple Emmy Awards. Receipt of the Billboard Century Award, and guest mentoring on American Idol Season 6, as well as performing during its finale. He received the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Humanitarian Award. Bennett was also awarded the National Endowment for the Arts Jazz Masters Award in 2006, the highest honor the highest honor the United States bestows upon jazz musicians. 2008, Bennett made 2 appearances on New York State of Mind with Billy Joel at the final concerts given at Shea Stadium. And in October, releasing the albums A Swingin' Christmas with the Count Basie Big Band, for which he made a number of promotional appearances at holiday time. In 2009, Bennett performed at the conclusion of the final Macworld Conference at an expo for Apple Inc., singing "The Best Is Yet to Come" and "I Left My Heart in San Francisco" to a standing ovation, and later making his Jazz Fest debut in New Orleans. February 2010, Bennett was one of over 70 artists singing on We Are the World 25 for Haiti, a charity single in an aid of the 2010 Haiti earthquake. In October, he performed "I Left My Heart in San Francisco" at AT&T Park before the 3rd inning of Game 1 of the 2010 World Series and sang "God Bless America" during the 7th inning stretch. Days later, he sang "America the Beautiful" at the rally to restore sanity and or fear in Washington, D.C., which he reprised 10 years later in a segment on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. 2011, September, Bennett appeared on The Howard Stern Show and named American military actions in the Middle East as the root cause of the September 11 attacks. Bennett also claimed that former President George Bush personally told him at the Kennedy Center okay, let me back that up a minute. Okay, so we know that he went on the Howard Stern Show and named American military actions in the Middle East as the root cause of the September 11th. Okay, Bennett also claimed that former President George W. Bush personally told him at the Kennedy Center in December of 2005 that he felt he had made a mistake invading Iraq, to which a Bush spokesperson replied, "This account is flatly wrong." Following bad press resulting from his remarks, Bennett clarified his position, writing, "There is simply no excuse for terrorism and the murder of the nearly 3,000 innocent victims of the 9/11 attacks on our country. My life experiences, ranging from the Battle of the Bulge to marching with Martin Luther King, made me a lifelong humanist and pacifist and reinforced my belief that violence begets violence and that war is the lowest form of human behavior." September 2011, Bennett released Duets 2, a follow-up to his first collaboration album, in conjunction with his 85th birthday. He sings duets with 17 prominent singers of varying techniques, including Aretha Franklin, Willie Nelson, and Queen Latifah and Lady Gaga. Bennett appeared on the season 2 premiere of the television procedural Blue Bloods, performing It Had to Be You with Carrie Underwood. His duet with Amy Winehouse on Body and Soul, reportedly the last recording she made before her death, charted on the lower reaches of the Billboard Hot 100, making Bennett the oldest living artist to appear there, as well as the artist with the greatest span of appearances. The single did well in Europe, where it reached the top 15 in several countries. The album then debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, making Bennett the oldest living artist to reach that top spot, as well as marking the first time he had reached it himself. A model of Koss headphones, the Tony Bennett Signature Edition, was created for this milestone. Bennett, having been one of the early adopters of the Koss product back in the 1960s. In November of 2011, Columbia released Tony Bennett, the Complete Collection, which was a 73 CD plus 3 DVD set, which, although not absolutely complete, finally brought forth many albums that had not been a previous CD release, as well as some unreleased material and rarities. December 2011, Bennett appeared at the Royal Variety Performance in Salford in the presence of Princess Anne. In the wake of the premature deaths of Winehouse and Whitney Houston, Bennett called for the legalization of drugs in February 2012. In October of 2012, Bennett released Viva Duets, an album of Latin American music duets featuring Vicente Fernandez, Juan Luis Guerra, and Vicentico, among others. The recording and filming for the project in Fort Lauderdale was co-sponsored by the city. On October 31st, 2012, Bennett performed I Left My Heart in San Francisco in front of more than 100,000 fans at a City Hall ceremony commemorating the 2012 World Series victory by the San Francisco Giants. He published another memoir, Life is a Gift, The Zen of Bennett, and a documentary film produced by his son Danny was released, also titled The Zen of Bennett. September 2014, Bennett performed for the first time in Israel with his jazz quartet at the Charles Bronfman Auditorium in Tel Aviv, receiving a standing ovation. He also made a surprise cameo appearance on stage with Lady Gaga at High Akron Park, Tel Aviv, the previous evening. The performance took place days before the release that month of the two stars' much-delayed collaborative effort and resultant Grammy-winning album Cheek to Cheek, which debuted at number 1 on the Billboard charts, extending the 88-year-old Bennett's record for the oldest artist to do so. At the end of 2014, Bennett and Lady Gaga kicked off their co-headlining Cheek to Cheek tour. The pair also appeared in a Barnes & Noble's commercial. September 25th, 2015, he released an album of songs composed by Jerome Kern, featuring Bill Charlap on piano, called The Silver Lining, The Songs of Jerome Kern. On November 1st, 2015, Bennett, joined by the choir from the Frank Sinatra School, sang America the Beautiful before Game 5 of the Baseball World Series between the Kansas City Royals and New York Mets at Citi Field. August 19th, 2016, shortly after his 90th birthday, Bennett was honored by the unveiling of an 8-foot-tall statue in his likeness in front of the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. With Senator Dianne Feinstein, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, and several San Francisco mayors in attendance, Bennett was serenaded by a young adult choir singing I Left My Heart in San Francisco. Bennett had first sung the song at the hotel in 1961. And that same year, he performed at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade on November 24th and the Rockefeller Center tree lighting on November 30th. December 20th, 2016, NBC televised a special concert in honor of his 90th birthday. In September 2018, Bennett re-recorded the George Gershwin song Fascinating Rhythm. After 68 years and 342 days, according to the Guinness Adjudicator, earning the title of the longest time between the release of an original recording and a re-recording of the same single by the same artist. The song on the collaborative album Love Is Here to Stay with Diana Krall, that was released on September 14th. Looking more of Mr. Tony Bennett's great life, his artistry, painting, his musical style, and all of his great awards and recognition, his works and his books, many things that he has done over the course of his 94 years on this great earth. And it all started with his great legacy back in Astoria, Queens. Hope you enjoyed this look at the man who continues to do great things with his voice and has one heck of an appearance for a 94-year-old person. We thank you, Mr. Tony Bennett, for your great, great contributions to the life that you are leading and still continue to go with. May you live to the ripe age of 100 and get to that point in your life where you can say you are a centurion. I'm Jason DeCanio, and we thank you very much for this episode of The Legacy of Queens. Next time on the program, next week, we're going to look at another person from Queens. Let's take a look and see who we can divvy up here. People from Queens. Okay, so we go to Queens and we go to the notable people. So we have looked at Tony Bennett, and let's see. We have all these rappers. We're not going to do that person. Let's see. Who's a real good one here? We're going to look at Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman, who was an American theoretical physicist, known for his work in the path integral formulation of quantum mechanics. Yes, because he was born in Queens, New York on May 11th, 1918. That's next week on The Legacy of Queens, episode number 6. Have a great Thanksgiving. And remember, always, to be honest, be real, and keep it always simple and real. It's time to do a little soul searching as we end this program. I hope you have a great day and a great Thanksgiving week. We'll see you on the 29th, the day, 2 days after Thanksgiving. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
forget to subscribe to the David3000 Network for great more content like this one.